Now, when we talk about the forms of energy, I've mentioned that, again, I can't say it enough, the sunlight hits these little cells inside of these leaves and plants and turns and makes with water and carbon dioxide, it makes the glucose. It makes sucrose. It makes the fructose. Two forms of energy. You've got carbohydrates and you've got fats. Now, like I said, protein can be used for energy, but only in emergency conditions. Why is that? Because you want your proteins, you don't want to be using part of your skin or part of your eyes or part of your liver just to survive. You want to be using sugars that your liver is stored for that purpose. Your liver stores sugars and it will meter it out when GG tells it to or signals it to. And also, you want to be using fats that you've stored for energy, and you'll do that when GG indirectly signals that whole process, and indirectly when insulin is no longer inhibiting enzymes that would be releasing the fat storage. So you have to think in terms of these two hormones, insulin and GG, when you're thinking in terms of the forms of energy in your body. Now, on this whole list here, here's an avocado full of energy. People say it's high in fat, but it's a wonderful fat. Here are whole grains that's full of energy in the form of, mainly in the form of carbohydrates. Here's some cheese down here. A fermented raw cheese is what I'd recommend if you're going to eat cheese. Here's some fermented raw butter. That's just practically all fat. Here are these fruits and vegetables. These are mainly full of an energy form. Mainly would be the carbohydrates. Normally very few, quote, fats and oils in most fruits and vegetables. In the nuts and in the seeds, you'll have more. You'll have some carbohydrates there. And you'll have a lot more of the oils, and those are considered very healthy fats as well, as long as you're consuming these in a whole and natural state. Now, I'm not talking about some sort of a processed where the seeds and nuts and all that have been crushed and all the fiber and all the other things have been thrown away, and the only thing that's left would be these oils. And then they're subject to high heat and light, and they become nothing but a free radical cocktail. But if you're eating everything in a whole and natural state, these would be a good and wholesome form of energy. Just a little digression here about energy that we do get from carbohydrates. Courtney, there's only really two molecules in this whole video that I would ask you to remember, because it will make a huge impact in the second half of your life. You've reached the first half, and now we should look forward to the second half. And you'll reach the full term of the second half probably if you understand these two molecules and how it will influence your metabolism for the rest of your life. So, on the left we have glucose, and on the right we have fructose. And these are two little sugar molecules, again, made from sunlight. And if you look closely, the only things that you see there are the letter C, the letter H, and the letter O. C for carbon, H for hydrogen, and O for oxygen. Just these three little atoms put together in a way that we can use as a form of energy. That's what the plants made, and we eat the plants, and that's what we use for our energy as well. The white table sugar, everyone refers to that as sucrose, and that's made up of sucrose is a molecule made up of two other molecules, of one molecule of glucose and one molecule of fructose, and you put those together with a little bond there, and it forms sucrose. And when we eat sugars that are naturally occurring in fruits and vegetables, your body has enzymes to break the sucrose molecule down into where it can use the glucose, and the glucose goes off into the bloodstream, and the fructose, where does that go? It goes to the liver, because the liver's job is to clear anything that's a poison. Now you may wonder why on this green earth, why we have a poison so prevalent in fruits and vegetables, and that is something I don't have an answer for directly. I'm hoping that fructose as a poison, when it occurs naturally in fruits and vegetables, has some benefit for us, but I'm not sure what it is. But anyway, when we're talking about the energy from carbohydrates, mainly we are talking about glucose and fructose in the form of sugars that are in the fruits and vegetables. And there's another very important form of carbohydrate, and that's called starch. And starch would be a string of glucose molecules. Now, normally plants, they want to be able to store their energy as well, and they store it in the form of starch. So starch is simply one glucose molecule attached to another glucose molecule to another one, and so on and so on, and they can be, I guess, thousands of molecules long. And we eat a potato that has starch in it. We eat a sweet potato. We eat a banana. These are things that have starches in there, and our body can break that down into simple glucose, where it goes into our bloodstream and it goes around the body for energy. There's a little subset of starches called resistant starches, and that has been getting a lot of buzz over the internet of late, and that's basically starch molecules that our body cannot break down, cannot digest. However, beneficial bacteria in our colon can digest these resistant starches, and they're very helpful apparently for short-chain fatty acids that give us super brain function, and they just go on and on about some of the benefits of resistant starches, and you can find them in green bananas, for example, very green, not green tipped, Corny, that you like, but really green. You can find them in plantains, and then the major source that they talk about on the internet would be from potatoes. So, when we're talking about energy in the blood, what we're talking about is the amount of glucose, that one molecule that I was showing you just a few moments ago. And you have roughly 5 grams. That's just the amount of, just the tip of my finger here in terms of the amount of glucose that would be in your blood. Now I try to, there's only one graph, Courtney, in this whole video that you really have to concentrate on. Not this graph. It's not this graph, it's another graph coming up, but this is just a little introductory graph. And all I'm showing here, Corin, is you've got the amount of glucose in your blood over time. Over time. So I'm just trying to make the point that your blood, your body tries to keep it within 5 grams. It tries to keep the amount diluted in your blood to about 5 grams. Some people compare that to a teaspoon of glucose that would be in a teaspoon. But frankly, in my everyday, I've never seen glucose in a form that I can put on a teaspoon. But anyway, so I'm just kind of comparing that amount to this amount that's on my finger here. Now the point of this 5 grams here is that if you're eating a meal or you're eating something that somehow has a lot of sugar in it, carbohydrate in it, starch or sucrose or fructose, not fructose, sorry, but it has sucrose in it or high fructose corn syrup in it. If the amount of glucose in whatever you're eating goes into your bloodstream, suddenly you're way over that 5 gram. You're way over. I mean, you're off the chart. And by the same point, if you haven't eaten for a long time, you're really dipping down here. If you didn't have GG helping you, I might add. But if you have not eaten and you have low glucose, GG is there to try to push it back up. And if you have eaten something, insulin now is trying to bring you eat something and your glucose goes up because you've got glucose in your blood. And now insulin senses that in the pancreas, and it will try to mobilize the insulin symphony to try to bring the level back down to baseline. So this graph, and I don't have, this is not the graph I want you to remember, this is just the little pre-graph, all right? Like a pre-treatment. The real treatment is coming up here in a moment or two. Now, just a background, I took a slide here from Dr. Robert Mackey, and he has a wonderful slide here. I'll just point it out to you. This is a representation of a cell in your body, and your cell is surrounded by receptors. These are little things that take the telephone call, okay, that I spoke about earlier. So they call those, the medical profession, they have a term for that, they call them receptors. And the receptor is here in blue. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 receptors on this cell. And over here you have these little red, little red dots. And those are there to represent glucose. And insulin is here in little blue dots. I don't know if you can see them very well, but they're little blue dots. That's the insulin. And when you eat something and glucose starts to go into the bloodstream, your pancreas, because blood is flowing through there, generates a number of effects that finally tell the pancreas, go ahead and produce and release insulin into the blood. Now, why do we want insulin going into the blood? Because insulin is going to, remember, insulin is in the blue. Insulin is going to go and knock on that cell wall, that cell door, that cell receptor, and it's going to tell the receptor to open up and allow the glucose in red to go in. So you can see now the little glucose, little red circles, little red dots there, are now, some of them, inside the cell. And that all happened because insulin, as the messenger, went to a little molecule, or a little well, I won't get into that, a little receptor, they call it, on the cell, and it told the cell to open up and allow the glucose to go in. Now, I'll spend a little time on Dr. Mackey's picture because I would like you to live the full term of the second half of your life, Courtney, and if you understand this slide that Dr. Mackey provided on his website, yeah, you've got a great chance of doing that. It's a lot more complicated, really, than insulin in blue knocking on the receptor, which is in dark blue here. So insulin knocks on the receptor door, so to speak, or it opens a key, and the receptor opens up. Because really there's a whole cascade of things that happen from the time that insulin actually touches the cell. There's a whole cascade of things that happen until finally something opens up so that the glucose can go into the cell. And let me try to give you another little example that I try to use. I've tried to explain this to a few people. Let's say that insulin is now in your bloodstream. You've eaten something. And now insulin's job is to go and let all the cells in your body know that glucose is there for the taking, and it wants to let the cells know this. Now, remember we said that having a lot of sugar in the blood was very bad because sugar in the blood is really like a poison in the blood if it's concentrated at too high of a level. The body needs to get the sugar out of the blood and back to baseline as fast as it can. So let's imagine that let's imagine a house, so to speak, and the insulin is knocking on the door of the house, and let's say the butler comes to the door and opens the door, and now the butler goes to the upstairs occupant there on the second floor and says, well, we've got this or we've got that wants to come into the house, and now the occupant on the second floor goes and opens up a window. And now the glucose can go into the window. Like I said, it's a lot more complicated than even this graph, even this little representation here. And you've got to, in the example that I was just giving you, you've got to open the door, the butler's got to be awake, the butler's got to be able to walk upstairs, the butler's got to communicate with the upstairs occupant, the occupant has got to go over and open the window, they've got to make sure that the window is not stuck in a shut position, that they can unlock the window. There's all kinds of things. There's a whole cascade of steps to make sure that glucose can go from the blood and into the cell. And that is, this whole concept, if we can understand this, it will go a long ways to giving us, helping us achieve a healthy lifestyle. Because this whole concept of glucose in the blood, the energy from glucose in the blood is such a critical concept on how we humans work. There were people in the past who spent years and years trying to figure out what we ate, how what we ate affected the level of glucose in our body. And they came up with a concept called the glycemic index and the glycemic load. As I recall, the glycemic index took a volume of some food and tried to measure how much glucose went into our body and how insulin reacted to, let's say, 100 grams of that food. And then later somebody else came along and said, well, we really don't eat 100 grams of, let's say, carrots, for example, so maybe we only eat, half a cup of carrots or a fourth of a cup of carrots in a typical meal. So they took this whole concept of how our body's reacting to a food in theory, and they tried to relate that to how we really react to something in practice, into everyday life. And they call that the glycemic load. And Dr. Mackey, again, on his slide presentation, gave a very good explanation of how different foods that we eat will affect our insulin levels. And there I have a few examples over here. White bread, for example, is 72 on a scale. Whole wheat bread, which I said is probably not whole, just a few sprinkled bran flakes in there, that would be 69, so very close to white bread, which shouldn't surprise us really, because most of the people that make whole wheat bread, really white bread is made from whole wheat bread, so whatever's left I guess they consider wholly made from whole wheat bread. Anyway, the whole thing about breads and how they're named leaves a lot to be desired in the world. Sourdough bread, if it's made from 100% whole grains, has a fairly low glycemic impact. In other words, the amount of glucose inside sourdough bread, because remember, it's been fermented by all the bacteria. The bacteria and the yeast, they ate the sugars in the grains during the whole preparation process. And some sourdough bread studies have shown that it's about 52 on the scale, and carrots are right up there at 48. So it's pretty close to carrots, for example. Anyway, that's one of the reasons that I eat sourdough bread, is because I want I call them affectionately the bugs. I let the bugs eat the sugars in the grains first. Actually, the lactobacillus that comes naturally on the grains, those like to eat the maltose in the grains, and they produce a byproduct of glucose, and so the yeast like to eat the glucose. So when you have a sourdough bread, the amount of glucose that's left in the bread is greatly reduced, but then you've got all this wonderful fiber and all these nutrients and trace minerals and vitamin E and other things that are wonderful. So that's one reason why I personally advocate sourdough bread. However, in fairness to people all over the world that suffer from celiac disease and gluten intolerance, I have provided the names of some doctors that are at the top of their field in trying to identify the dangers of grains, and I'll mention those in a few moments here. Now, this is another slide that I took from Dr. Eric Westman's video presentation, where he is very concerned about the types of carbohydrates that people eat. He separates them into good and bad. The good carbohydrates would be all the whole foods that we've been talking about during this video, whole and natural foods. And the bad ones are all these things that have been denatured, processed, with added oils, added sugars, and I don't even dignify these things by including them under the definition of food. But anyway, they are called bad carbs, according to Dr. Westman. Now, we've been talking a little bit about energy and the forms of energy that we get, and I mentioned from the get-go something about healthy fat. And just so you know, Corin, the average adult has about 2 months of stored fat in the body. But the liver that I've been talking about being able to meter out this meter out the glucose, only has about 1 day's worth of energy there. So our bodies have adapted to handle fat as our storage of energy, and they've adapted to have glucose that's stored in the liver, and some that's stored in the muscle cells. But mainly the liver's job is to release this stored energy in the form of glucose to the body in times of the fasted state, in times of famine, if you will. But as you can see, since the amount of energy that we have from fat is about 2 months, and people who are overweight may have 3 months, 4 months, or more. That's all stored energy in the form of fat. Now, fat can be converted to energy if our hormones, remember the hormones, if those are working properly and the cells can hear it. And the way that our body does this, they turn fats into something called ketones. Ketones. This is the graph, Courtney, I wanted to ask you to try to learn. I'll spend a little bit of time on this and then we'll take a break. Remember I said that healthy fats are very good for us, and they also are the way in which we store our energy, and that GG is responsible for helping us do this, and also the lack of insulin in the bloodstream helps out as well. We're designed, when we have a lack or very little insulin in our blood, we're designed so that certain cascades and domino effects of enzymes will now start to perform functions in concert with GG, so that we can use the energy from fats, and we can use the energy, the very limited energy that we have stored in the liver. So what did I write down here? I said that if our body is working properly, GG is able to, through its signaling, these telephone calls, so to speak, to call the fat cells, and indirectly the fat cells will stimulate a hormone inside the fat cells. It's called hormone-sensitive lipase. Hormone-sensitive lipase. And that's a hormone that's inside of our fat cells. We know where the fat cells are. They're around our middle and our thighs and whatnot. Anyway, GG signaling and the lack of insulin signaling will now allows the energy that's stored in the fats cells in the form of these free fatty acids and triglycerides and whatnot. These can be allowed to get out into the bloodstream and over to the liver, where the liver will convert these to something called ketones. And finally, glucose is there in the liver to be metered out as needed. Now, this is the most complicated subject that we can imagine, and I went all the way through high school, college, graduate school, and 20 or 30 or 40 years of professional life, and I never knew a darn thing about this, and I was unhealthy as I was a very unhealthy person and heading the wrong direction. But once you understand this graph, I made this graph by myself, by the way. So remember, I had that very simple graph before, where here was the glucose on this what do they call it, this side of the axis, and this is time down here. So our body wants to maintain this 5 grams, about this much sugar in our blood all the time, okay, about a teaspoonful of glucose. So when we eat a meal, the glucose, which is here in blue, will go up. The pancreas will sense that there is glucose in the blood, and it will stimulate the production of insulin, a hormone that will, through the insulin symphony, receptors and messengers and enzymes and all these things all over the body, it will try to get all this glucose in the blood into the cells. And if the cells can't take it up fast enough, then that glucose will be converted into fat. But that's another story coming up. But let's just stick with this one for a moment. So we eat a meal, there's the blue little curve there where the glucose is in blue. That's going up because we've eaten something. And then insulin goes out into the blood and goes everywhere in the body to try to get that glucose back down to base level. Now, in between meals, as our level of glucose starts to fall, GG is there in the pancreas, right in the same little spot as the insulin, and the pancreas senses that the levels of glucose, the level of energy in the blood is falling, and therefore the pancreas will send out GG. GG will, one of its first destinations would be the liver, because the liver has stored up this 1 day of energy, of glucose. So it will tell the liver to release the glucose. And the glucose will go to the brain and all the other cells in the body so that all these cells have energy to power those little mitochondria inside the cells. Now, if there's not enough glucose to go around because you haven't eaten enough, or you've designed your meals in such a way that the liver has exhausted most of its supply of stored glucose, then if you look at the bottom graph here, GG will start to stimulate the production of ketones. And ketones will start to be used as an alternative fuel source, and that's coming from the fats that we've stored. So let's go up here to the top one again. You eat a meal, insulin comes out, brings your glucose back to baseline. In between meals, the level of glucose falls. Your body produces GG, your pancreas produces GG, and that tells the liver to restore the amount of glucose, to meter it out, to put glucose back in the blood. So now you go back up to the 5 grams again. Now you eat again, insulin comes out again, and you get your body back to the 5 grams again of that level in your blood. And in between meals again, your glucose goes down, and then your body senses that, your pancreas senses that, and sends out GG, where GG goes into the bloodstream and goes to the liver. There are receptors on the liver, by the way, and it tells the liver, go ahead and release the stored glucose. So if this was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you eat a breakfast, the insulin tries to bring your glucose back to baseline. Between breakfast and lunch, GG is trying to bring your level of glucose back up to baseline. And then from lunch to, then you have your lunch, your glucose goes up again in the blood, insulin goes up again also, goes around the body to tell all the cells to take in the glucose. Between lunch and dinner, same thing happens here. Your food is digested, now your level of glucose starts to go down, and now GG is going to talk to the liver and say, liver, meter out some glucose because we need that. Our level is below this 5 grams that we really want to keep as our baseline. And then dinner comes around, you eat again, and insulin is again trying to keep the level of glucose in your body at this magical blue line, this light blue line. Now, this down below here, I just mentioned that a moment ago, if you are trying to, the first thing that we have to remember, and I think I said it in the beginning. If I didn't say it in the beginning, it should be said now. The whole purpose of doing this video for you, Courtney, and all my friends, is to share what I learned in the last several years about all these hormones and how the body works. What we want to do is restore our metabolic function. We want to get this up and down, up and down, up and down, working in the right way so that our body always has the energy that it needs, so that our brain is fully fueled with energy so that we feel good, so that we feel like moving, we feel like working, we feel like sleeping, but we want to restore metabolic function. So, if our goal is to restore metabolic function, and what I mean by that, if our goal is to restore our health and our vitality, then we want to understand how insulin and GG are working. And this was a very simple representation of eating 3 times a day. Insulin is up here in the red, and as we eat, insulin is coming out and helping with all kinds of signals and other enzymes and proteins and receptors and messengers and chemicals, all kinds of things, to go ahead and process all this energy coming into the body. By the same token, in between meals, in between the meals, and after we've digested our meals, and after insulin has done its job to get the energy, get the glucose back to baseline. Baseline meaning not too high and not too low. After this process of digestion, and we've assimilated our food, maybe that takes 2 hours or 3 hours depending on what we ate. Now GG is the one responsible for making sure that the level of glucose and the level of energy in our body is maintained at baseline. Now, if your liver has plenty of sugar stored, plenty of glucose stored in the liver, that's a fairly simple process. GG goes and knocks on the liver cells and say, okay, go ahead and meter out the glucose. So in this upper half here, I have just 3 cycles, you see, of 3 meals in a day. And if we have restored that process, and it may take people months, it may take them a year to restore this most basic of metabolic function. But if they can restore it, then they can, if they've restored their metabolic function and they've restored their health, then they can start thinking in terms of manipulating that a little bit in order to start to lose weight. But losing weight should be the last thing on your mind. The last thing on your mind. The first thing on your mind is restoring your health and your metabolic function. Because without that, you will never be healthy, and whatever weight loss you may have achieved may have come at the expense of loss of parts of your arm or parts of your kidney or other proteins in your body. Or it may come at the loss of proper hydration and proper water levels in your body and fluid levels in your body. You don't want that either. If you're trying to lose weight, what you want to make sure is that you are losing weight that is in the form of stored fats. That's the weight of the stored fats. This 2 months or more, or 3 months, or 4 months, or 5 months of stored energy that we have in the form of fat. But anyway, after we have achieved a level of metabolic function again, then you can start to manipulate that a little bit, and this is speaks to that here in this lower graph. Again, here's your 5 grams of glucose in your blood. You eat a meal, insulin comes out to go ahead and process this energy that's come in. And now, in between meals, here's the second meal at another later time during the day or the next day. And in between now, GG is going to keep the level of glucose in your blood at baseline. And then after a period of time, GG will be communicating with your fat cells so that the fat cells will start to release energy in the form of these free fatty acids. They were stored as triglycerides. It's a very complicated story, but the point of it is GG will now, with its whole symphony of receptors and enzymes and all these other hormones working together, GG will start to use ketones, and ketones are the natural breakdown of stored energy in the form of fats. Now we're really talking about fat on your body, these extra pounds that you want to lose. Now GG can start taking these extra pounds and helping to convert that so that your body can use them as energy. So that now you'll have this absolutely wonderful way to lose fat in a very controlled and in a very healthy manner, so that you can keep your weight and your metabolism functioning in the way that you want it to. Now in the next section we're going to talk about how this whole process becomes dysfunctional. And they call that many names. Metabolic syndrome, they call it high levels of uric acid, they call it insulin resistance. It comes by all kinds of different names, and we're going to address that in the next session. Well, good morning, Courtney. This is a continuation of the presentation about a healthy lifestyle. And yesterday we were talking about this graph, and I wanted to make a few more comments about it. This is the graph, Courtney, that I would like you to remember and understand, because I made it myself, and I tried to explain really what is how the body is dealing with energy, how it's dealing with glucose, and how it's dealing with fat in our body. And if you understand this graph, I know that you will be able to control your weight, control your energy level, and you will prevent all the chronic diseases. So let's go over it a little bit. First of all, the title of this slide says Healthy Fats, GG, and Ketones. And I'm trying to tie together this concept of healthy fats, which would come from avocados, fermented dairy products, would come from nuts, seeds, other animals that are free range and eating what they were designed to eat. And GG, which is the hormone that is trying to help regulate our energy in the absence of food. And another word up here called ketones. Ketones are the energy molecules that GG helps to make. These ketones are actually made in the liver, But the signaling for all of this, for all the ketones to be made, really starts with GG, and the absence or the downregulation of insulin in the body, which is no longer inhibiting the production of ketones. So over here I said that GG signals the fat cells to release energy, and it does that in a very indirect path. From the studies that I did, most people really never found a direct contact, a connection between GG and releasing fat energy from fat directly. But all the latest research is showing that there's something inside the fat cells called hormone-sensitive lipase, which is taking triglycerides, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and breaking those down into what they call free fatty acids. These are little strings of energy molecules, and they're releasing those into the bloodstream. And because they are little fat molecules, they can't go in the bloodstream by themselves. Because their fat and oil does not mix with water, and most of your blood is water. So these little energy molecules, these free fatty acids, have to hitch a ride on something that you've heard of before in your blood, and it's called albumin. And it's a protein that it circulates in the blood, and these little free fatty acids, they hitch a ride and they go all over the place. And many of them end up in the liver, and the liver will now convert these little energy molecules into ketones. And ketones are the body's molecule. It's the way that if there's no more glucose available, and the liver has started to exhaust this little one-day supply of glucose, then with GG's symphony orchestra, so to speak, the body will start to make ketones, and these ketones are made in the liver. A body will also make glucose as needed. I think that they have a name for that, gluconeogenesis, and that is also made in the liver, as far as I remember. But the point of this whole slide, it's so important, I'll stop swimming for a moment here. Yesterday I said that if we were looking at the top of this graph, you can see three humps, so to speak, and that is, we're eating a breakfast. This is just an example now. We're eating a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner. We eat the food, we get the energy, we get the fat, we get the carbohydrate, we get the protein, and insulin is now produced because the pancreas senses you've had something to eat. So insulin is in the red here. There's the word insulin. And insulin also goes up, and now it's bringing the glucose, the energy level, and the proteins and everything. It's helping to digest all these things. And so now your glucose level goes back to baseline. In between breakfast and lunch, your energy starts to go down. You can see the little blue arrow there starting to go down. That's your sugar levels in your blood, your glucose levels. And then GG swings into action and brings the glucose back up to baseline. So you don't feel lightheaded, you don't feel dizzy, you just feel this wonderful, even energy level the whole time. Now, this graph, we'll give it a name here. This is, let's call it the normal functioning graph. the body's a normal functioning as far as energy. And so anyway, now you have lunch and you get another infusion of energy, fats, carbohydrates. You get proteins, and your insulin is managing how to handle the proteins for growth and reproduction. And then in between lunch and dinner, there's maybe 5 or 6 hours there. After 2 or 3 hours, you've digested your lunch, and the glucose levels start to fall down again, and Gigi swings into action again and keeps the glucose in this, call it the blue zone, the sweet spot, this baseline level that we're talking about. And then you have your dinner, and the same thing happens. You have energy coming in, you have proteins coming in, and insulin again swings in. And as you can see on this graph, the glucose will go up and down, up and down, up and down, and then when you fall asleep, it will start to go down again, and then Gigi will take care of you while you're sleeping. Gigi's job, again, is the whole symphony. They're going to, Gigi and all the other members of the symphony will try to keep your glucose in that sweet spot, in that level. Now, don't be upset if you can't really understand all this in a few minutes. Frankly, it took me months and months and months, and listening to one expert after another, and they explained it coming from a different point of view, and somebody might have been a doctor or a medical researcher or even a fitness expert. And by the time you hear it 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times, and you finally start to really understand it and how it applies to yourself and your body, oh, then you've really hit the jackpot, Courtney. That is the holy grail of taking care of yourself. That's where it's at. If you understand that, oh my goodness, the rest of your life you'll be able to control your health, your weight, your energy level. Now let's talk about the bottom one here. And I've introduced another little name here, another little word, fat. We know what that is. Fat, F-A-T. And I wrote it in a nice kind of orangey, brownish color, similar to that fat picture that you were holding up. I'm sorry I don't have the picture handy. I'd show it to you again. But yesterday I mentioned if you understand how all this works and you modulate what you eat and the time in between your meals, you can extend the time that Gigi is taking care of you. And what have you done? You've done something that is something you wanted to do your whole life and something I wanted to do my whole life, but it always eluded me. If you understand how insulin and Gigi work together, you can modulate the two. You can have a meal, and remember, this is a meal of whole and natural foods. Whole and natural foods. All the nutrients and all the fiber. All the nutrients and all the fiber. So you've had that meal, and now insulin has done its job. It's packed everything away. It's stored. It's used. And now your glucose level starts to go down after 2 or 3 hours. And that's when Gigi's taking over. Well, let's say that you've done this, you've modulated this over a period of days or weeks or months. Gradually, you have used up this 1 day's supply of glucose in the liver. So the liver was keeping this standby 1 day's worth of energy. And by the way, you've heard before that the average daily energy requirement is let's say 2,000 calories or 1,800 calories or whatever. What they're doing is they're talking about how much energy you require to breathe and move and let your heart pump your blood around and everything. This is kind of a daily requirement of energy that we need. I think they call it the basal metabolic rate or something like that, energy requirement. But basically it's how much energy you need every day to live. Not including moving around, which would require extra energy, not including stress. And by the way, stress can make such an impact on all of this movement between insulin and GG that some commentators believe that many people who think they're diabetic, they're not diabetic at all. What they have are stress-related levels of sugar in the blood that are so that are changing all the normal parameters to such an extent that one doctor may think that they're diabetic, but another doctor might think, well, no, this is all caused by stress. Now, I have to pass on this whole notion of stress and how this influences all the hormones because it's beyond the scope of what I'm trying to share with you today. What I'm trying to share is what we really can control. We can control, or we think we have a chance of controlling what we eat. And if we can do that, then we have a chance of controlling and modulating what insulin is doing and what GG is doing in the body, and both of those symphonies. So, going back to this lower little graph here, and again, this is all trying to depict normal function in the body. So let's say that I wanted to explain this lower graph here. So let's say that you've had a meal. Insulin has gone out into the bloodstream, the whole symphony. They've contacted the fat cells, the liver cells, the heart cells, the muscle cells, all this cascade of messengers and receptors and all that. And now insulin has done its job and glucose is back to baseline. Now, if you modulated your next meal, in other words, you decided when the next meal will take place, you can extend the time that GG is going to be in control of the situation. Now you are the one who's controlling whether GG is out there or not. You're controlling the time that you're allowing GG to and the rest of the symphony to take control of what's going on. But the benefit there, if you can extend it in a properly functional body, and by the way, I'll recommend when you can start modulating this in later slides. You don't want to start doing this right away because it takes a long time for GG and gene expression in your body and receptors and other things to start working properly. Like I said yesterday, it can take weeks, it can take months. For some, I suppose it could take years. But anyway, if you let GG extend the time and you don't have any more energy reserves in your liver, it doesn't drop down to zero, I suspect, but it starts to get low, and the liver can tell, and GG can tell, and the rest of the body can tell, if it's properly functioning, that the glucose is going to run out soon, so we better start accessing the fat stores. And that's what you want to access if you're trying to lose weight. Now remember, you can't lose weight unless you're healthy. So to be healthy and to have all the hormones and all the signaling working properly, to have that whole symphony orchestra, whether it's insulin or GG, to have all the members of the orchestra working properly, that's health, and if you're not healthy, you can't lose weight, not in a healthy manner. But anyway, so let's say that you are in a healthy, functioning body now. You've got everything working right. All the Symphony members are working right. Insulin has done its job, and now you're extending the time that GG is in GG mode, GG effect, if you will. Now GG will start indirectly tapping on these fat reserves in the adipocytes. That's the fancy word for our fat cells, for our blubber, as we used to call it. So now the GG is signaling the fat cells, and indirectly now these free little fatty acids are being released into the bloodstream. They're stored in the fat cells, by the way, as triglycerides, and we'll talk about that. But 1, 2, 3, they're called the little free fatty acids, and those will be released into the bloodstream. And then when they find their way to the liver, those little free fatty acids can be converted into ketones. And that's why I have this word up here called ketones. And ketones are down here on this graph, because now it's such a long time in between meals that GG, in order to keep our energy level at baseline and to keep glucose at baseline, it is now accessing the energy packets called ketones from the fat cells, and it's working with the liver to use the fat that we've stored as energy. And the arrow is pointing downward because as you're using the stored energy in the fat cells, the amount of fat that you've stored starts to disappear. Now don't worry, even the thinnest of us have about a 2-month supply of energy locked up in our fat cells. But we only have really a day's supply in the liver of glucose. So by modulating, this is one meal here and the second meal is over here. I didn't write down any times here because people understand how this works. They really know how to modulate that. They know how much fat they want to burn in a given period of time. They can almost calculate it. You can get pretty good at it, really. So anyway, finally, because some cells in the body can only use glucose, your body always tries to figure out a way to make glucose, and if you can't get it from our little simple carbohydrates anymore, it will try to make it from these let's call it functional groups of a triglyceride or from some of the amino acids. But your body will figure out how to regulate the amount of glucose it needs. But gradually, GG will, if it's working properly, gradually GG will help stimulate gene expression, what they call it. They call it gene expression, where your basic design now is coming back to where it was originally designed, and you're going to start to be able to use ketones for your brains, for cells in the body that weren't used to using ketones. They were only used to using glucose. So your need for glucose will go down, and your ability to make ketones, to use ketones, and to regulate how much of this energy is coming out of the fat cells and how much of it is coming from perhaps some proteins or other functional groups in the body, or even some cells are sacrificed and they're repaired and they're recycled, so there would be energy coming from those cells. Anyway, in a properly functioning body, this graph, as far as I'm concerned, is my best effort to try to explain this. Now, don't get upset, because I have a list of health experts that explain how the whole insulin, how the whole cascade works. And if you hear it 3, 4, 5, 10 times, you'll understand it, and it will just open up a whole sense of control of how you're going to deal with your health and your weight. So anyway, that's enough said about the one slide. My goodness, I was hoping this whole presentation on a healthy lifestyle would just be just a few hours, and here, well, anyway, it's gone longer than I thought it would. So let's go over to the next slide here. And the next slide, this is all about when things are starting to go wrong. So I'm going to swim here for a moment and just kind of read the slide with you. This whole discussion now, we're going to start talking about insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is, kind of in a nutshell, when you have glucose running around in your blood, but the cells are no longer responding to insulin. And what that means is that if you remember the little slide that Dr. Mackey put together, I put it up here again, and these you had these little red circles. That was glucose in the blood, and then you had insulin, the little blue circles, and they were acting kind of like a key or somebody knocking at a door. They were signaling through all kinds of different steps. They were signaling to let the glucose go into the cell. And this little thing here, in kind of a light shaded, this is a cell. This is just a little section of a cell. This cell could be in your brain. It could be in the lining of your arteries. It could be in your liver, your kidneys. We have to think at the cell level. Well, anyway, so insulin resistance is when this whole process here in this lower, what do you call it? A little graphic. When the whole normal process is breaking down. And Dr. Mackey had a presentation where he explains this very eloquently, I might add, and far better than I can. But I'm worried that you may not watch some of these other videos, so that's why I'm taking the time to explain it myself now. I hope you do watch all the videos someday. I have a list of them at the end of this program. But anyway, so here is the Dr. Mackey's presentation, where this whole Insulin Symphony and GG Symphony, all those things have all broken down. They're not working right anymore. And if they're not working right, you're getting unhealthy, you're starting to develop the chronic diseases, and you can't lose weight in a orderly, healthy manner. So what's happening here? You see all these little red circles here. It's all building up in the blood. That is, your blood is just filling up with glucose. And also what's happening, insulin is filling up in the blood. So you've got both glucose and insulin building up in the blood, and the poor cell is starving to death. Now how is that? What's going on here? What's going on is that the cell receptor and the whole signaling pathway and all that is breaking down. Maybe maybe the cell itself has closed down the receptors. Maybe the butler's fallen asleep. Maybe the butler's quit the job. Maybe the window is locked. All of those little steps that each cell has to go through in order to get glucose to go into the cell. Maybe the cell is full of energy already. Maybe inside the cell, instead of having just 3 little sugars here, Dr. Mackey was trying to depict the situation where the blood is full of glucose, but very few of those little glucose molecules are actually getting into the cell. So, but it could be in another portion of the cell, maybe in the mitochondria, is just full of energy, and it can't take any more energy. And so maybe signaling paths are coming up to the cell surface saying, we can't take any more glucose. So whatever the reason is, your body, your pancreas, remember, that's where the insulin is made. The pancreas has blood vessels that go through the pancreas, and the pancreas is smart. They can sense there's glucose, there's been a meal. They know that there is sugar in the blood, and so they pour out the insulin there. And so now you've got insulin and glucose floating around in the bloodstream at high levels. So like I said over here, maybe the cell is already full of sugar already, or full of glucose, I should say. Maybe the cell has all the locks on it's got the door is locked, the windows are locked. Maybe it's just free of fatty acids already. Whatever all these reasons might be, and it could be different for different people, you have something called insulin resistance. And as we will learn later, a lot of people in the medical profession believe that insulin resistance and understanding that is the key to everything about your health. And what it means is that the cells are no longer responding to insulin, and the whole you have higher insulin levels. The pancreas even senses that there's the pancreas is asking itself, well, why aren't these levels of glucose going down? Because the body doesn't want to have high levels of glucose. Remember that we said earlier, glucose will attack the proteins everywhere. Well, glucose will even attack the red blood cells and make the red blood cells sticky. That's why you've heard previously that most people who have severe cases of diabetes will have, they'll go blind. They'll have to amputate a leg. And why is that? Because these portions of the body are not getting any blood supply. They're not getting any oxygen. And why is that? Because the red blood cell, let's hold up my hand here, that's getting, it's getting attacked. It's getting attached almost like a free radical I'm just swimming here to keep my hands up. But now that red blood cell is even too large to even move through the little capillaries. Those are the tiny little blood vessels that supply the nutrients and the oxygen. So anyway, insulin and problems with insulin is a very serious condition, so that's why we're going to spend a little bit of time on that today. But going back to this graphic on the top, you can see that there's a lot of glucose still in the blood, and there's very little glucose inside the cell here. And you can see even some of the cell receptors, they've kind of practically disappeared. In the lower graphic, where everything was working normally, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 receptors and all that, and they're working fine. But now in the dysfunctional cell, dysfunctional levels of insulin and glucose, Dr. Mackey has here only two of the receptors that are working. The other 1, 2, 3, 4 in this little graphic here, they're not working anymore. So on a cellular level, the upper graphic is trying to explain dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction. So remember, we have to think of our body and our metabolic health in terms of at the cell level. And I had an earlier picture of a little spot on your face there and tried to blow that up, and you could see the little hair follicles, and you could see the little sweat glands and whatnot. But then if you go even deeper and deeper and magnify that more and more, you get down to the cell level. You get down to the chromosomes, you get down to the receptors, the signaling pathways, and all that. And at that tiny little microscopic level, I wanted to compare that to a house. So you've got, if insulin is knocking on the door, glucose has got to be able to find a way into the windows. And you could just think of this whole house there as a little cell. And you want to think of having a healthy cell all over your body. And you want to think in terms of how the hormones are working. All the cell receptors are working. Maybe the cell receptor, you could kind of think of that as the front door. And insulin has got to figure out a way to open that door. Maybe it's got to grab the doorknob, it's got to turn a key, whatever it is. Just you can imagine you've got to have a good, healthy, functioning cell at that level. And I spoke about the butler. I spoke about the butler's got to go upstairs. You can think of those as what they call transporters and other signaling chemicals. Enzymes, these are all things that are happening inside the cell. So you can think about the, if you're kind of imagining a whole house as your cell, it's one cell in your body. And remember, you have as many cells in your body as there are stars in the night sky, and multiply that by about 15,000. 15,000 times the number of stars you can see in the night sky. Not 1,000 times. Not 5,000 times. But by some of these estimates, there's something like 45 trillion cells in the body. And each one of them we have to take care of. Each one of them. So, on the one hand, it seems like an impossible task, but on the other, if we eat whole and natural foods, and we exercise, and we watch what we consume and what we drink in our beverages, and we have good water, and we protect ourselves from all these new chemicals and pesticides and things of advanced civilization, we can do a pretty good job of taking care of ourselves. Anyway, back to cell health here. I found a little cartoon where the doctors are trying to repair in a surgery situation here. When a patient comes in, I think many doctors, when they get to know their patients, they really instantly know what patient is taking care of him or herself, and what patient is, so to speak, a fixer-upper. A fixer-upper, like something, like an old home that nobody is taking care of. The doors don't work, the hinges don't work, the roof is leaking, the doors and the windows are all crooked and rotting away. Well, we don't want to be in a position where our cells are fixer-uppers. We want every one of our cells, the 45 trillion or so that we have in our body, to be in wonderful shape. You know, the insulin is very, very important, and if you, so is Gigi for that matter, but insulin is something that is triggered all the time by the foods that we eat, and if we eat a lot of foods, especially all those RCOs, they're full of refined carbohydrates and denatured fats and free radicals and all that. What happens is that you have all this, you have all these opposing forces going on in the body. And I tried to make a little cartoon here to explain that. There's nothing funny about it, but let's talk about sugars here for a moment. When you eat refined carbohydrates, whether it's breads, cookies, it could be pasta, it could be even all the refined processed products. They are converted, many of them, to sugars, and that causes the liver to convert these sugars into triglycerides, they call them, and it converts them into fat. So sugar, refined and added sugars, these are converted into fats. So when you have insulin resistance at the same time, it starts a whole cascade of problems in the body. And insulin resistance can cause the fat cells to release these free fatty acids that I was talking about, these little molecules of energy. And then the liver senses these free fatty acids in the blood and tries to reconvert them back into triglycerides. Now, this is a very complicated subject, and many people spend a whole college course or a whole graduate school course just on fatty acids and triglycerides. But what I wanted to do in just a simple fashion is try to explain this little graphic here, this little cartoon. Because for those of us, and myself included, when I was trying to lose weight, I knew nothing about hormone balance. I knew nothing about insulin. It's amazing you can go all the way through college and grad school and all that and not have the foggiest idea of what hormones really do and how insulin works, and it is amazing. So that's another point. But back to this, like I said, if you have high insulin in your blood, and that's elevated insulin because the body is sensing that there's sugars that are in the bloodstream, and the body desperately wants to get rid of these extra sugars. Sugars are, too much sugar is like a poison in your body. So the pancreas will make more insulin until it finally burns out, and that's why it can't make insulin anymore, and that's why a lot of people take these insulin shots. But anyway, so you've got this high insulin in the blood, and the high insulin now it cannot, the cells in the body normally they are storing energy because insulin is telling them to store energy. But if these cells, and now we're talking about some of the fat cells, if they are insulin resistant and they've shut down the insulin receptors, they can't see the insulin, they can't hear, they can't hear that signal anymore, that communication. then it's as if the cell is now down-regulating the insulin pathways inside of that. And what does the fat cell do? It releases free fatty acids, these little molecules of energy. And they skip a ride together with that protein albumin, and they're in the bloodstream now, and they get to the liver, and the liver says, oh my goodness, we've got all these free fatty acids. Well, we're just going to start making triglycerides. That's the storage form of these little energy packs. And these little storage forms, they come in threes. That's why they call them tri, for three, glycerides. And so the liver will happily make these triglycerides from these free fatty acids, and then in order to package these triglycerides, it's got to make another very complicated subject that we haven't really talked about yet, and that's VLDL, cholesterol. They call them lipoproteins. And so anyway, the liver is going to make those, and it's going to try to get the fat cells to store these, and then the fat cells, they're going to reverse the process because they can't see the insulin anymore, and so you have a merry-go-round going on in your body. The merry-go-round is you're trying to lose weight, but you can't lose weight. Or to put it another way, your fat cells are getting rid of some of the fat, and then the liver is packaging the fat back up again and sending it back to the fat cells. It's kind of like two people giving each other a present, so to speak. One gives it to the other, and the other person gives it back to the first person. And so this fat is just going around and round in your body in a very vicious circle. And it's all being caused by a dysfunctional metabolism. Like I said here, it's insulin resistance causes the fat cells to release the free fatty acids in a never-ending cycle. So you're just on a merry-go-round of frustration, and at the same time you're practically famished, and you've got all these cravings, so you'll eat more terrible foods, and it just goes on and on and on and on. That's the merry-go-round that I'm hoping that this video inspires you and helps you get off of. So when we talk about insulin resistance, many doctors they also try to describe a cluster of symptoms which they call metabolic syndrome. And they have normally five signs or symptoms that indicate to them that chronic disease is just right around the corner. The first one is easy to see. It's the size of the waist. The second sign or symptom is high blood pressure. The third one is high sugar in the blood. The fourth one are these triglycerides. Remember, I just said that triglycerides are something that the liver is packaging because it's receiving all of these free fatty acids, and it's receiving other lipoproteins, they call them, chylomicrons and other things, and it's the liver is trying to package all these fatty acids because the liver doesn't want them inside the liver. It's just going to cause a fatty liver. And some doctors and researchers also believe that uric acid levels are another elevated levels are another sign of what they call the metabolic syndrome. So the metabolic syndrome, like we like I just said, they are a cluster, a grouping of fairly easily determined markers that can let all of us know, by the way, it can let all of us know whether we are thin or overweight. Because thin people, they can have high triglycerides, they can have, I forgot to mention the HDL, they can have very low HDL cholesterol. They can have, thin people can have high blood pressure and high sugar and high uric acid levels. So they can be just as metabolically dysfunctional as an overweight person. And that's why many doctors believe that the whole epidemic well, the whole, it's not just an obesity problem going on worldwide, it's a metabolic dysfunction problem going on all over the world, and it's affecting people who are overweight and people who are thin. So anyway, these are the clusters, and that's what they're calling the metabolic syndrome. Now, here is an unfortunate subject who's showing the metabolic syndrome, demonstrating it for you, if you will. The name of the individual will be kept silent to protect the innocent and the unknowing, the unwilling. But anyway, so you can see in this subject a very large waist. The subject had fairly high glucose levels, fairly high blood pressure, fairly high triglycerides, high uric acid levels, occasionally well, anyway, the subject had low HDL, that's the supposed good cholesterol. I say supposed because there's a story with that one. And then the insulin resistance and fatty liver. Now, the fatty liver was discovered, maybe 5 or 6, 7 years ago with ultrasound, where they use the same technology that they use with mothers, and Courtney, you know all about that. But anyway, they could see that there was fat piled up in the liver. So obviously, the owner of this belly was not taking care of himself. And the owner also thought that it was more of a cosmetic problem, fitting into a nice tuxedo or a nice suit and looking good. You don't want to be looking too prosperous. But anyway, the owner of this belly really never understood how serious the situation is. And well, we've heard of baby fat. Meet sugar fat, because all of the carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, and all the oils and all that, all the RCOs had developed into this very serious situation. The owner of this belly could easily go on to develop all the chronic diseases. Heart disease, already had fatty liver, high blood pressure, brain dysfunction, Alzheimer's. And by the way, some people call Alzheimer's the type 3 diabetes. You've heard of type 1 and you've heard of type 2. Type 2 is your bread and butter insulin resistant type of diabetes, where you're what we just discussed in the previous slide. Well, some people are calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because it is a preventable disease that's nothing more than the effects of aging on the brain caused by this whole business of the metabolic function. I'm sorry, metabolic syndrome. So, I just mentioned the owner of that belly there had was a sugar belly, and remember now, you want to be very careful about how much sugar you're taking into your body. And sugar is not only what you see in a little sugar cube, or it's not only, it can come from all the refined carbohydrates in terms of being overloaded. Because when you ingest refined carbohydrates, you're not taking it in with all the other nutrients and all the fiber. So it's very easy to overdose on glucose. So remember, here's a teaspoon that Dr. Westman uses. I believe in his presentation, his teaspoon has this white material. I believe that is sucrose. Technically speaking, only half of the sucrose, only half of that sucrose would be the glucose component. Remember, there are two sugar molecules that make up sucrose. But the point of the slide is very well made, and the point of Dr. Westman's video presentation is very well made, and that is that sugar is a free radical causing a monster in the body, and it's very easy to overdose, and it's very easy to put yourself into a whole metabolic syndrome pathway. And don't forget Dr. Lustig's admonition to the world now, and that is the effects of fructose, which in its unrefined form he's not worried about in terms of fruits and vegetables. But in terms of refined fructose, especially whether it's sugar like this that they put into sodas, or if it's high fructose corn syrup, he thinks that's a poison, and that will certainly cause a sugar overdose as well. The reason that we're saying here that sugar turns to fat is because if there is too much energy in the blood, in terms of glucose, your liver wants to very quickly reduce that level of glucose and bring it back to that baseline, that 5 grams. And the only way that the liver can do this is to madly make what they call convert that sugar into fat, and then send that fat off to the fat cells. Now sometimes the liver can't do that fast enough because the amount of sugar coming in is so great in any given time, and then if the liver can't send it out fast enough, then the liver itself ends up getting fat and ends up getting a fatty liver. And now you've got the liver in a very dangerous situation because its job is to filter the blood, and now all of its internal structures are being clogged with fat because it can't process it fast enough, and the fat cells can't take up the fat fast enough. So all the signaling in the liver starts to go south, and GG and insulin, they're just overwhelmed with the whole situation, and it just goes from bad to worse. Not to mention you've got free radicals eating away at all the cells and in all the internal structures, and then finally you've got the mitochondria down in there. If they become dysfunctional, they become, what a lot of researchers believe, they become cancerous. So now you have in every cell of your body that has mitochondria, you have dysfunctional little powerhouses that are potentially little cancer time bombs. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. This slide here, I'm trying to explain in a graphic here what I just said. So here you have the typical obese situation. They call this the visceral fat, by the way, the fat around your torso. And what's happened here is there's been so much sugar and refined carbohydrates coming into the body that everything is starting to break down. And what do you have here? If this was normal, like we said before, you eat, you digest, GG is working properly, and then you eat again, you digest, GG takes over. So you have this wonderful little up and down balanced cycle. And if you are eating all the time and you're eating refined foods, you get this crazy pattern here where the glucose may spike up for a little bit, insulin may spike up, but then you've got so much insulin in the blood, it reduces the level of sugar in the blood by so much, then it actually goes below baseline. But because there's so much insulin in the blood, GG is not working. GG is not coming out, because even in the pancreas, if you've got insulin elevated in the blood and elevated those pathways and signaling inside the pancreas, that will inhibit the production of GG as well. So here in this middle graph here, you've got sugar intake, refined carbohydrate intake, you've got refined oil intake, and it's all contributing to this cascade of well, it's really just a spastic, unregulated, dangerous situation that's going on day after day, month after month, and year after year, until finally you just, you can't recover from it. So here, if here's a situation where you're eating these refined foods, these RCOs, and the sugar is elevated in the blood, like we showed before in Dr. Mackey's slide. The insulin, that's in the red here, the insulin is always elevated, and now the fat is always elevated, and it's going up. So that's a very dysfunctional body, and that situation leads to all the chronic diseases. Dr. Lustig, he has a whole campaign, and deservedly so, about fructose. And fructose in its refined condition. Refined as opposed to unrefined, which we'd find in fruits and vegetables. Fructose is a carbohydrate, that's true, and it's made by these innocent little leaves over here and whatnot. But it's metabolized as a poison, and it's metabolized into fat, just like alcohol. And it's all done in the liver. Dr. Lustig, in his very eloquent presentations, and he has many of them on YouTube now, he says that a high sugar diet is a high fat diet. He says that the fructose, and he singles that out. Remember, fructose is half of that little white powdery stuff that we call sugar, sucrose. And it's also a major component in high fructose corn syrup. Sometimes it's 55%, sometimes it's 65%. I'm not sure all the different formulations that they have, but all the manufacturers that use fructose or high fructose corn syrup and all the RCOs, they're doing that to extend the shelf life, as a browning agent. They want things to look more tasty. The point that he made over and over again in his presentations, and he has many of them, is that fructose is a poison that is metabolized in the liver, and it's a toxin. Fructose is a toxin that causes the liver to raise triglycerides. It raises free fatty acids. It causes fatty liver deposits. It causes high blood pressure, and it causes elevated insulin levels. It leads to insulin resistance, and it also lets the brain think that we're starving, and it drives hunger, and it drives elevated levels of uric acid that can lead to gout. In terms of high blood pressure, a lot of people really have never understood the connection, but according to Dr. Lustig, it inhibits the body's ability to make a nitrous oxide. And nitric oxide is something that allows the blood vessels to relax and dilate. So every time your heart is pumping, you want to be able to have the ability in your vessels, your blood vessels, to dilate as well, to accommodate this burst of pressure that the heart is pumping out. Now, Dr. Lustig believes that high fructose corn syrup is so dangerous that it should be a controlled substance, just like any other, what he refers to as addictive drugs. I think that if people understood the destructive nature of the refined sugars, they would be doing all they can, because it's just going all over the world as a health crisis everywhere. Dr. Lustig also has zeroed in on this whole notion of cravings and addiction and all that, and feeling of hunger. He's been zeroing in on something called leptin resistance. And they found out not so long ago that the fat cells in our body make a hormone called leptin. And leptin communicates with the brain that, hello, that signal again, and it's coming from a hormone. And the signal this time is not hello or okay, it's you're full, you've had enough to eat. You know, that little message going off to the brain. But he believes that with all the problems of high fructose corn syrup and fructose being metabolized in the liver as a poison, that it is causing this another syndrome that he's referring to, leptin resistance. And what that means is your fat cells are making the leptin, but the brain is not receiving the message. The brain is not receiving the message that you've had enough to eat, that your energy levels and fat stores are enough. So if people aren't getting this this signaling through up to the brain, then they'll just keep eating. So according to Dr. Lustig, the leptin should let you know that you have enough fat in your body. It should let you know whether you're hungry or not, and it should let you know whether you need to burn or store fat. When you have the addition of leptin resistance and insulin resistance, you have more fat cells producing more leptin, and you're getting less signaling to the brain. Now, what happens? It means you've got uncontrolled eating, because at the cellular level, your poor cells are starving for energy because all the signaling that allows the glucose, the energy to get into the cell, that's all broken down. And the brain thinks you're starving because it's not getting the signal, we're full, from the rest of the body. So you just have a vicious circle. You feel starving, you have cravings, your brain thinks you're in the middle of a desert without any food. So if it's going to try to find food and gobble it up and binge on it as much as it can, because it's worried that the body's going to starve to death. So anyway, this whole notion of hormone balance and hormone signaling, you can see, Courtney, why that's the key to a successful, healthy lifestyle. So I wanted to go back, kind of summarize this whole section, and that's to zero in on what I call the RCOs, refined carbohydrates and oils. And that leads to insulin resistance and high uric acid levels. And there's a very elegant explanation of that in Dr. Lustig's presentations. And that leads to the insulin resistance and leptin resistance and the high uric acid, the high blood pressure, the low HDL cholesterol, the high triglycerides. All of these cascades of events, what they call the metabolic syndrome, that all leads to these chronic diseases and obesity. So it's, I think it kind of starts with all the RCOs, refined carbohydrates and the oils. By the way, Corn, when you decided last year to try this dietary plan, that was a diet. What I'm trying to talk about, differentiate, is a whole lifestyle. You want to be healthy first, and then you can start to think about losing weight. We want to get everything. We want to get the whole metabolic function in your body working properly. The weight will take care of itself. That you can believe.